Hi guys and welcome. Hi Leslie.
Hi.
It's so great to have you back with us. We are going to be chatting about surfaces, the different surfaces in agility today, and how we think they might relate to injury. Leslie, who have you got there? Please introduce us.
This is Felix. He is wondering why we are up so early. It must mean we are going to do agility, but he's going to be sadly disappointed.
Sorry, Felix, no trip anywhere exciting today.
No.
Okay, so if you guys are joining us live, it's really great to have you. Please feel free to join the conversation. As I said, we're going to be talking about agility surfaces today and how they potentially might relate to injuries and to performance in agility dogs. So let's see where the conversation takes us. It's great to have you back, Leslie. It's always fantastic to chat with you. So let's jump right in. Please introduce yourself and your interest in this topic.
So I'm Dr. Leslie Eide. I have been a vet for way too long now, 15 years, I think, if the math's correct. And I've been doing sports medicine rehab for 10 of those years. I have a very strong interest in agility because I myself have been competing in agility since about 2000 with many, many dogs, from obviously beginner to all the way up to national level and hopefully someday international. So agility is my love, my passion, and of course I want to make sure to keep it as safe as possible, but it's also a sport, which comes with its own risk. So that's why I like looking into these things.
Awesome. And having these conversations and talking about what we find is the first step, really, to trying to find those connections, right? So if you guys are joining us live, it's really great to have you. Please feel free to join in the conversation. Let us know where you are and what your interest is in today's topic. We are speaking about agility surfaces and their connection to injuries, potentially. And any of those other connections that we can make or talk about today. So, Leslie, what are some of the surfaces that we find in agility arenas at the moment?
Yeah, there's quite a variety. And having lived in 2 different climates where we have some good weather and some not so good weather, I've experienced a lot of it. I'm going to kind of just have broad categories, but know that within each category, there are differences. So we've got things like dirt, grass, like a sand, which could kind of go with the dirt, but it is slightly different. We have artificial turf, and then we have kind of different types of matting. It's a wide variety of like commercially made kind of cushiony with grip matting that can be put down.
Do you find that like one dog in one season would need to compete over multiple of those surfaces, or are you generally competing on one or two?
Yeah, so typically I would say you have a main surface in your area. So again, like in my area being rainy most of the time, we're in indoor horse arenas usually. So that means it's dirt. But if we travel to other parts of the country for bigger events, we're going to experience different types of surfaces. So for example, next week, I'll be traveling down to California and I'm going to be outdoors on grass. Now, how well that grass is taken care of is a question that I don't really know until I get there.
Okay. So that's definitely something to think about when you're changing from surface to surface that your dog hasn't been trained on or prepared on. That might be a risk factor, right? If I'm just thinking.
I think that's a huge risk factor that we need to think about. When I was kind of just starting out and getting into traveling, I had a coach who told me, and this may not be the best advice, but I took it to heart, and I think it has some good feelings behind it, some good intention, and it was basically like train on the worst surface you can find so that your dog is going to really like it when it's on a good surface. So if you train on a bad surface and they know how to handle that, when you get somewhere that is well kept and has a good surface, you're not going to have a problem. Now, how much that handles up between like types, I think, it's not a perfect statement, but it kind of also goes along with the general feeling of train so the competing is easy.
Okay, great. A few people have joined us live since we've started, so it's really great to have you guys. Please join in the conversation. We're speaking about agility surfaces. If you have any questions, ask them, experiences, share them. We'd love to hear from you and chat with you. So what are some of the main kind of questions or factors that we want to ask or consider when we think about the impact that a surface may have on either performance or injury risk?
So I think the biggest factor is going to be either like how grippy it is or how slippery it is. It's the same component. It's just a matter of how you think about it. Because I do think we have the extremes. An example that might be easy to imagine is wet grass, like first thing in the morning. That's going to be more slippery, right? The dogs, the moisture in it is not going to allow as much friction between the bottom of their paws and the ground, and they'll be slipping around more. Versus really grippy surface is not great either, because the dogs, there's a natural slide that they get used to, a natural kind of carrying out, and how a turn is going to be. So some of the matting that we see being used, I think, is on the too grippy side, and that can cause injuries in the fact that like their paw sticks to it, but their body keeps going another direction. And so while I can't give any examples of a dog injury that happened on it, when I was teaching on that kind of surface, I actually had a human break their ankle because their foot stuck to the surface and their body kept going. So you need to find somewhere in between, I think. And that's where kind of preference and what the dog is used to plays a big factor.
I'm also assuming that I know this from looking at horses. We have some great like slow motion footage of them, but there's, like you say, there's a natural kind of give and slide in the surface in just a normal landing stride, especially when you're increasing speed. And when you stop that slide, you're increasing concussion. So it's not even just that you might, around a turn or something, have the body going one direction and then the foot getting stuck, but just in a normal stride, that initial land, there's like a little bit of a slide and a give in the surface that needs to happen. So I didn't even think of that. That's a really good point. And we need to, I think, get some slow-mo footage of the dogs and see what's happening just with that landing phase on different surfaces. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And even on like hard packed dirt, where you would think like, oh, well, it's so packed and it's really, they're landing hard. That's still that top layer, they can move a little bit. And so I personally would prefer that over a lot of almost, I would say all of the matting that I've ever experienced. I have yet to experience a good, nice matted surface that the dogs, I think, move naturally. Because the other thing I see with it is over time, the dogs start to adjust to it, and it really affects how they move. They shorten their stride. They don't like to run in extension. They like keep everything really collected as they move around it.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you're seeing a different biomechanics. That's really interesting. Okay. All right, so the amount of traction that the surface has would be one consideration. What else are you thinking about when you're looking at a surface?
So I think a lot of other people think kind of what we just said of that, the impact, how hard the surface is. And I won't I can't say we have as much of a an obvious correlation of that to any kind of injury. I have told people, like, one of the ways I judge surface is how I feel at the end of the day. So if I feel very achy in my legs, if, my joints feel kind of
Mhm.
sore and like they've been through the ringer from running the courses all day, I imagine the dogs might be feeling a little similar, but we can't ask them. And oftentimes with these dogs, as we know, they're not going to outright show any kind of, you know, issue with that, because it is more like a soreness, right? It's something that I know I'm going to go to bed and be fine in the morning. It's, well, I'll have recovered. But that's pretty much the other, actually, I feel like that's the main issue people talk about and kind of judge things on. And I think I would weight traction higher than that, like the hardness of the surface. I do like cushion, mostly because it feels nice to me, and I like ending the day without my body hurting.
Okay, so the hardness of the surface, and that can go both ways again, right? It can be really hard or it can be very deep and soft and squishy, and then that's not great either.
Yes. So kind of that, I would say that brings up like care of the surface, because that's really what it comes down to with the main surfaces, where I think hardness plays a factor, because we're really talking dirt, and the sand, the felted sand, I would say, are the main that, our care, the human care of that surface, can affect whether it's hard or too soft. And I've experienced that where one of I'm just going to say my absolute favorite surface is the felted sand. I think it's a lovely surface. It I don't hurt at the end of the day. I think dogs really run well. It's got that natural quality of, like, there's going to be a little bit of sliding, but it's not slippery. But if it's not cared for the how the dogs are going to use it, it can create performance issues. So the way we want it for horses is usually a little softer, a little deeper, and that doesn't work for the dogs. We need to pack it in a little more. We need to put more moisture into it. And if that doesn't happen, it's I don't think, no, I could be wrong, but I wouldn't say injuries are necessarily a worry with that. It's the performance. It slows them down. It's harder for them to jump, so more of the bars are coming down. If they're later on in the runs, you can have really deep grooves through the weave poles. And if the dog is little, it may have trouble navigating those deep grooves. So there's definitely, just within the surfaces, it's how they're taken care of too, can make a huge difference.
So really important. Um, Before we kind of go to the next point, I just want to put the research thing out there, right? Because right now we don't have any research that tells us, hey, this surface does this or that, or etc. in the agility dog. So we're really talking about your experience now, which is really valuable. So do you want to add anything there before I ask you the next question?
Yeah, like I said, it's all my experience of competing myself and all my sport clients. And I definitely think I've had a lot of agility people that, on all kinds of different surfaces, and watched how it moves. And I've banned clients from certain surfaces because I'm like, nope, you can't go back to that. So, yeah, lots of experience with it, even if it may not be, researched back.
So what would make you ban a client from going back to a specific surface?
So again, I think like the care of that surface and what's happening with it, and the injury that this dog has had. So in this specific case that I brought up, it was a medial shoulder syndrome dog, and the surface she trained on was artificial turf. But and this is a big thing with the agility community. We have a tendency to buy used artificial turf. So the turf that's no longer good for human athletes to run on. And then we put that in our dog facilities and have the dogs run on it for years and years and years and years. And so this turf was already used when it got put in the facility and had probably been there 5+ years. And it just, when we think about like the slipperiness, it was highly slippery. And with the medial shoulder syndrome, I didn't want to take the chance of that dog landing and pushing out and slipping and ripping everything again. And so that's why I was like, you can go train on real grass, you can go train on dirt, but you can't train on that artificial turf anymore. And when that facility is no longer open in my area, but when it was, I will say over 50% of my agility injuries came from that facility.
Okay, so there is a relationship between surface and injury, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about your experience and kind of those correlations that you've seen in your patients. I'd love to hear more patient stories.
Yeah, I think that's the most that I've like experienced in one area where, I had this high correlation where I would ask, where do you train? And this place. Different trainers. There's all, different people teaching at that facility. So that it wasn't necessarily that they were all coming from the same class, but that facility definitely tended to create more issues. And I think, my logic went to, there's a reason that the human side of athletics is getting rid of these surfaces, replacing them with new turf, that maybe we shouldn't be using it for our dogs. Maybe it's not the best. The other big surface that I see issues with personally is the matting. And that's not less injury, but more the mechanics like you were talking about. So I do a lot of coaching for jumping, teaching, helping people teach their dog how to jump appropriately, read distance, and, all of that. And I do get a lot of people coming from matted surfaces because their dogs, it changes their natural movement. They want to stay tight. They want to take short, choppy strides so that there's no worry of that getting stuck. I think if I was in the dog's head, that's what I would think is happening. So I don't think I've seen a lot of injuries with that because the dogs aren't actually moving very fast. They're kind of actually being safer. But if a dog has no experience on the matting and goes from some kind of more natural surface that has the give and then suddenly competes on matting, you will see a lot of like falling, not, a little bit of checking themselves as they go through of like, or, again, performance issues of like, I didn't realize I wasn't going to move like I normally did, and like going around obstacles because they just don't want to hurt themselves trying to stay on course.
Okay. That's so interesting. I love that you've mentioned the jumping and that you help dogs learn how to jump properly, because did you watch the series of webinars with Ariel that we shared a little while ago?
I saw bits and pieces of it.
Bits and pieces.
Yeah.
She shared some research on the jumping biomechanics, and then between young dogs and experienced dogs, and that it's different. Like, yes, young dogs don't know how to jump properly. They have to learn that. And I thought that was so interesting and so important for us to know.
Very, very little time is spent in the agility world teaching jumping. Most of us just kind of, that dogs know how to jump. And it's not until like there's maybe a problem with the jumping that then where people are like, oh, well, now I need to work on it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of, if they, their criteria of jumping is just don't drop the bar. And,
Yeah.
if they do that, they're like, okay, it's fine. Doesn't matter anything else of how they're jumping. They're not dropping the bar, rather than being a little bit more in tune with like, let's make sure they're actually using their body properly when they jump from the beginning, rather than having them just figure it out over time.
I think that's so valuable. And I'm not an agility person, so I don't really know, but it was really interesting to me to see, the differences between really focusing on teaching them how do you jump in collection, how do you jump in extension, taking those turns, because it's different how you approach the
Mhm.
jump, or it changes everything. So just I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, we have a question from Artane. What is your opinion on bark surface? I found that the surfaces seem to travel more underneath the dog.
Yeah, so I'm not as experienced on the bark surface. We don't have that much here, but that would be my general thought, is because it's bigger, non-scientific words, bigger chunks that can move around a little bit more. There's more potential if like they hit something just the right way, it'll slip out from underneath them. So I would consider that more like towards that potential slippery spectrum, the slippery side of things, than the other.
Okay, awesome. So that's great. Artane, thank you for joining us and thank you for that question. I just want to invite everyone else, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. That's what we're here for. We'd love to hear from you and connect with you as well. So what did I want to ask now? Oh, I wanted to tell you guys that if you haven't watched that series by Ariel, it's like 5.5 hours. They're in our members portal. It's on the biomechanics of different components of agility. It's very evidence-based. I don't think she put anything in there that doesn't actually have a research paper behind it. And she says when there are gaps, which is really, really valuable, because knowing where the gaps are is important. This is one of the gaps, the surfaces that we're on, and that the dogs are competing on. And it's a pretty important one because it affects performance, and it affects injury risk, and it affects us, and it affects all the things. So, okay. So if we are going to be changing our dogs from one surface to another, and we don't have, wait, let me rephrase that. So we're going to go to a competition and we know that they're going to have X surface and we haven't trained on that and we're not familiar with it. How do we prepare our dogs if we don't have that surface?
Yeah, that can be really hard, especially depending on where you live. And, there, even in my area, I'm very limited to the type of surface that I can expose my dog to in a reasonable distance. So I do think partly, just showing the dog that they might run on different surfaces is good, even if it may not be the exact surface that you are going to go compete on. So, for example, you might go to class on dirt, but then you could also hopefully take something, a jump or two, to a park with grass and go do a little bit of stuff there. So now you've shown them, okay, here's what dirt's like, here's what grass is like. And then maybe you can find a little bit different, maybe a sandier dirt surface. Like for me, I would probably try and get down to like one of the beachy areas and see if I can do some stuff there. And again, I don't think you need to do a lot of like, oh, we have to constantly be training on these three surfaces, but just introducing them to you may get different experiences, I think can really help them. Then the other thing is that in most, like if you're traveling for really big events, so national, international competitions, there's always a training day. So you at least get to be on the surface the day or two before competition starts. The other thing is a lot of times when it is a unique surface that maybe a lot of people haven't been on, usually places around there that they know like people are traveling in, they'll open up their facility as well and say, hey, I've got this surface, come rent my facility for 30 minutes so you can do a little bit of practice. I know that especially with international competitions, a lot of times the team management will try and set that up even before the competition, so they get a little bit of practice on the specific surface.
Okay, I love that you can at least, and that's all, you know, a good athlete really needs is just that introduction so that they can find the way to move on that surface safely. So if you're on a new surface and you're noticing something in your dog that's different, when do you stop? When do you say, okay, this is potentially dangerous, we might have an injury here? Are there warning signs that you can pick up as a handler or an owner where you're going to say, hey, I'm pulling my dog out?
I think so. I mean, I think hopefully like you have a good connection with your dog and you can see when they're not coping. So, you know, a dog who normally stays on course and maybe only drops one bar, you know, suddenly is going around a lot of obstacles or dropping bars, and you're not seeing improvement. So like a lot of dogs, especially like we talked about, kind of those, you know, we talk about them like elite athletes, you know, they might in the beginning go, oh, whoa, this is different. This is not what I was expecting. But by the end of the course, they've already adjusted. And so if your dog is not adjusting within the course, and I, you know, maybe give them a second chance to see like, okay, well, adjusting in the middle of the run, some dogs don't have that capability. But if they haven't adjusted by the second run, that's where I would say, I don't think it's worth it. Plus you're not getting the performance you want anyway. So, you know, it's not one of those things where you're like, well, but I could do this amazing thing because my dog's amazing. Well, if they're not adjusting and they're dropping bars and going around obstacles, you're not going to get that. So the handler's just going to end up being frustrated as well. So better to walk away and say, I need to plan some training days on this type of surface if I want to keep doing it.
Okay, cool. And then earlier you were speaking about the kind of change in the biomechanics when they're on matting surfaces. And I was thinking as you were speaking, if they're kind of tightening up and holding themselves a little bit more collected and together, are you finding more potentially like myofascial trigger points or tightness in the muscles in those dogs? So not necessarily an injury, but you can feel it in their bodies?
Yes, I think they end up being a lot tighter and having less kind of flexibility, range of motion. So then when you switch to something where you want them to open up, that's where you can start to see issues, especially if the muscles are really tight and you're suddenly asking them to fully stretch out.
Okay, brilliant. Any questions from our audience, from those watching? It's really awesome to have you guys with us. I really love it. My mind is a little bit slow today. I had another question that I thought of, and now it's gone. Leslie, do you have anything else that you would like to add and share with our audience from your experience? How many dogs have you got there with you?
Well, this is dog number 2. This is Finnick. Right now, gosh, how many woke up with me? 4 woke up with me. So
how many are still sleeping?
There are 3 still sleeping.
Oh my word. Amazing. Are they all competing or not all of them?
Not all of them. The 2 you've seen are competing. I have the one of them is too young, so not yet. And 2 of them are retired. I was like doing math in my head real quick. Yes. 2 of them are retired.
Okay, nice. I remembered my question. So I wanted to go back to that statement that you made earlier, where you kind of want to train on the worst surface that you can. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because obviously training on a bad surface is risky. So how would you do that safely? And What are you thinking about when you're saying a bad surface? Because I'd love to. I have a little bit of experience here as well. I had my high school dressage horse. He was lovely, but I brought him to the farm one holiday, and we just made a little dressage arena in the paddock, which was downhill and uneven. So really not ideal. But when I went back after the holiday, we rode the best tests we'd ever ridden before, because he was, even though our training had been pretty horrendous on the uneven downhill slope, he was way more balanced and good in his body when we went back. So I really felt the benefit there. So how would we translate that to dogs, which is why people are listening to us today?
Yeah. So I think now that I've grown up a little and have more experience with that statement, is it's still, you still want a good safe surface. It's more about the care of it. So I think that really applies more to like dirt surface or grass, where, in a pristine show arena, that dirt is going to be extremely well cared for, right? They're going to be working it every day, adding water, adding clay, adding sand, whatever they need to keep it just the right consistency. But if you've got, a little riding arena in your backyard, you're probably not taking that much care of it. You're probably letting it get packed a little. You're not adding stuff, maybe occasionally you're going through and getting the big bumps out of it. But if you're practicing there, when they go to that really nice dirt arena, it's going to, I think, be like your horse, where they're suddenly like, oh, now I like everything I've been trying to do with my body just works so much better here, because the surface responds to that more appropriately. And I think that's the same with grass. So again, when you go to these, nice, I mean, we do tend to compete at horse facilities. So when you go to these horse facilities, they've been taking care of the grass, right? It's been watered and cut a certain length, and there's no gopher holes, and it's perfectly level. But you're practicing out in your backyard on this, like, it's maybe a little bit of a hill, and maybe you didn't mow it for a week, or and they get used to that. Then when they get to that nice manicured grass, they're like, oh, this is so much easier. Where I wouldn't take that statement is more towards like the artificial turf, like I said, where, we're putting them on this really used turf that also hasn't been kept up. And that's where, even though you could say, well, if I can compete on that, then when I go to these, events that have the brand new turf and it's all nicely kept, they'll do better. Yes. But I also do think there's a little bit increased risk with that, constantly practicing on the more slippery stuff or the more sticky stuff.
Okay. So you still want to avoid the ends of the spectrum where there's going to be an increased risk of injury. Do you take your dogs out into the wilderness and kind of like do some intentional proprioceptive, I would say, training, but not really, where you're just kind of taking advantage of the environment and uneven surfaces and changes in the natural surface? Yeah.
Yes. And I'm lucky that I have always lived somewhere that I have that capability, where I can take them to different places, let them be off leash, let them run through the woods or big open fields, the beach, on the sand, So I do think that's important. And I may not correlate it to importance for agility, but I think it's very important for life, just being able to expose them to that and get them out in the world. And it's something I do for their entire life, as long as we can, because I do think it's really important for their mental health as well as their physical health.
Okay. Well, I don't think it's not important for an athlete, because it's exposing them to different surfaces, and like you just said, when they're off lead and they're moving freely, they are exploring their own body's limitations and capabilities. And I think that's really important. If we're only ever like putting them in a specific ideal scenario where they need to move in a set way, they don't get to explore that. And then that's not then when things change, the surface change or the expectations change, they don't have that neurological ability to adapt to it. And so I think that's really important. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So to all of you that have joined us live today, it's been really great having you. We've loved connecting with you, and I think this is such an interesting topic, even though we don't have research on it yet. I think that will probably be coming in the future. There's so much happening in the agility world in terms of research. It's really exciting. I'm going to remind you guys again about Ariel's series in our members portal, because that is phenomenal. And Leslie has an old series in our members portal as well, which is by far one of my favorites. I still refer back to it quite often, Leslie, honestly. Like at least once a month, I'm thinking back to something in that exercise physiology series. So guys, super valuable. And it's not the only webinars that you've presented for us. There have been a few, so thank you. And then I just want to remind you all that the Vet Rehab Summit is coming up. That is in November, and it is all about excellence. It's all about taking us to the next level, and we're thinking a little bit outside the box. So when you go and look at the lineup, I just want to share this with you. You might be surprised because you'll see not so many clinical topics, okay? Which seems odd, right? Because that is what we do and that's what we're here for. But the reality is that there is an entire library in your members portal full of clinical webinars. And you've probably been to at least one conference this year already. So we wanted to give you something else at the Vet Rehab Summit, which is probably the missing thing that you don't have in your practice and that you don't have in your lives, which is why you're struggling to grow or achieve your goals or success. So we're helping that part of you, that part of your profession, that part of your skill set at this year's Vet Rehab Summit. So don't be surprised when you see those topics. They are for your benefit, and I think they are really going to help you take it to the next level. So sign up, join us. It's going to be great. I'm wearing our gold sponsors shirt. No woo-woo, just science. Okay, that's CuraCore. They're our gold sponsors this year, and it's been really great working with them so far. So Leslie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.